How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about The Hollow Man from the year 2000, directed by Paul Verhoeven, who you guys may know for directing some really classic films. RoboCop, Total Recall, Starship Troopers, and hey, just to see what this guy's up to is worth watching this movie alone. This movie actually does star Kevin Bacon, as well as Elisabeth Shue and Josh Brolin. Thanos himself is in this movie, but before he was Thanos. Anyway, this is a remake of The Invisible Man, although they don't really say it. I'm not 100% sure why this is The Hollow Man instead of The Invisible Man. You would think something as old as H.G. Wells would be in the public domain, but apparently Universal doesn't think so. I'm guessing that Universal doesn't want anyone to make an Invisible Man movie but them, and well, hey, they've made some good Invisible Man movies, can't really blame them. But you call it The Hollow Man, and you can get away with that now. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the plot. I'm not going to do any major spoilers, I'll talk about the setup and stuff, but I do want to say my piece on a few plot points, as well as make sure you guys have a basic understanding as to what this movie's about. We dive right in with Kevin Bacon's character. He's a scientist, and he's plugging away at his computer simulation, trying to find a molecule that won't blow up that he needs for this process. And eventually, he gets one that the computer simulation's like, yeah, that'll work. And he gets up, it's, really late at night to the point where it's basically early in the morning, and he calls Elisabeth Shue, his ex-girlfriend, and he's like, I found it, we need to go to the lab immediately. And he drives into the lab, and it looks like this old abandoned warehouse. He meets the security guards like, hi, and they're like, oh, hi, Kevin Bacon. And he goes down this elevator, and you see that while the top looks like an old abandoned warehouse, when you go underground, it's a modern science laboratory, and it's hidden away from the world. It's a secret lab, which is always cool to see. Not just a laboratory, not just a high-tech laboratory, but a secret high-tech laboratory. That's really, really cool. And the whole team meets them down there, and you get to see all the characters. You get they're working with animals at the moment, so you get the veterinarian character, you get the guy who's, the younger guy that just wants to keep up, and you do get Josh Brolin, his rival scientist. Now, unbeknownst to Kevin Bacon, his ex-girlfriend is actually currently in a relationship with Josh Brolin, and they don't want him to know because he's quite a character, and we'll get into that in a moment. They use his new chemical. They go through various overcomplicated scientific processes. The spinner, a big little container they have to put it in, and there's a magnifying glass, and it comes out shiny. And they get the new chemical, and they bring out the invisible gorilla. You see, they've been hired by the government to find invisibility. And they found invisibility relatively quickly, but the hard part is bringing people back from invisibility. Now, the exact science here they don't touch too much upon, obviously, because people don't really know how to turn people invisible, but they call it phase shifting. And it sounds like that they're taking the visible light and shifting it into like another unseen aspect of this dimension or something. So almost like the light bounces off of you, but then instead of going back into your own reality, the light shoots off somewhere else, or at least that's what I took from it. I might be wrong. They don't really explain this too well, but I do like that they had some interesting reasoning behind it. Anyway, the test is successful, and they bring the monkey back to visibility, and then they have a meeting with the government officials. Thanos and his ex-girlfriend are all really happy to tell the government that they figured it out, but then at the last moment, Kevin Bacon's like, oh, we're getting close, we haven't found anything yet. And they're like, why did you lie to the government? And you find out really quickly that he wants to be the first one to be invisible, and he doesn't want his project taken away from him from the government. So they decide to go to the lab, and he decides to test it on himself so he can become the first human being that's ever been invisible. and it goes really well. He turns invisible, he lives. However, they were a little rocky at the start, and they say humans are more complex than the things they've been testing it on. And he goes through his period. It's supposed to be like 3 days or something, and then they're going to pull him out of it. But of course, when they try to pull him out of it, they can't. He comes back for a second and then goes back to being invisible, and now they have to figure out how to bring Kevin Bacon back before he goes completely mad, because it can be tough being invisible. They have to leave him locked up in the lab, and he's getting really stir-crazy in his confinement. And hey, I survived 2020. I know about being stir-crazy when you're not allowed to leave your house. But, you know, he's stir-crazy in his lab, and there's other things like he wants the lights turned down really low because his eyelids are clear, and he can't close his eyes. Like, no matter what he does, he's bombarded by light. And that is something like, oh, gee, that would drive you insane. But of course, they don't bring him back too quick, and you really start to see it wear on his mind, and he's an already flawed character. And I guess when we get to the specifics, that's the most logical place to start, is Kevin Bacon's character. Kevin Bacon is your typical, you know, overly cocky protagonist. He, you know, has all the quips, and he thinks everyone loves him. But they do a funny thing with this protagonist, is he thinks he's the coolest thing ever. Everyone else in the laboratory secretly hates him because he's so freaking arrogant. And they also say, oh yeah, these are your stereotypical heroes, and this might be more what they'd be like in real life. And you do get to see some flaws of this character. What he says is, what would someone become if they couldn't look at themselves in the mirror every day? And you get to see things that were parts of him that were bad when he was visible, but granted the power and granted the stress from this experiment, it's going to push him into some very deep and dark places. So if you're easily triggered, note that this is a very, very bad version of the Invisible Man. Not bad as in poorly made, bad as in evil. And this guy is going to be doing some very, very bad things. And it's a really deep, dark take on the character. The other really cool thing is the special effects and the details. This is the Invisible Man when CGI could make it practical, and despite being CGI from 21 years ago, for the most part it holds up. There are some things that aren't perfect, but you get to see whenever someone goes from being visible to invisible and vice versa, you get to see all the little elements. You know, when someone's invisible, they stick them with the needle. You can see the goo from the needle, and you can see it go through their veins, and when it starts to make things visible, you know, you see it go the veins to the heart, and then the heart, it gets dispersed, and you can see it in their lungs, and it builds up the muscles and the bones, and you see them grow from the entry point all the way outward. It's a very, very cool and detailed process, and it took advantage of the modern technology, and because they did it well, for the most part it holds up. It's not perfect, but it's still pretty good, especially considering it's 21 years old. And, you know, you do get to see some really cool, hey, he's invisible, what can we do with that? You know, he's invisible, and they're testing him, and he has all the little stickers with the wires on it going to his brain, and they use that to show you where the character is, and you get to see just where he is by all these strings holding him up. And eventually, of course, rather than all the bandages, they decide to pour a latex mask over his face and then cut out the mouth and the eyes, and that literally is what gives him his name, the Hollow Man, as you can see inside of him, like he was hollow, and it's a really cool looking thing. That being said, they forgot to cut out the nose holes, and I think that would be something you'd want. You'd have to breathe through your mouth all the time otherwise, but oh well, little complaint. And of course, in all that, I touched over it briefly, it is a very cool lab. Now, sometimes overly comical in how high-tech and crazy it is, like you see the bathroom and it's this giant bathroom with giant pipes running everywhere. Maybe a little bit too complex, but it is pretty cool looking. You know, people put on the heat sensor glasses and gives them these cool red eyes, and you know, the centrifuge that spins things around, and the needlessly complex stuff. It's a pretty cool underground laboratory. It's cool and scientific, but also like cold and sterile, and you can see how someone would go mad if they were trapped in here for a long time and couldn't even close their eyes. That is a really, really cool setting, and major props to the setting. Now, one thing, kind of a flaw, is this does turn into kind of a slasher movie at the last third, and it is kind of an abrupt transition. Personally, I would have preferred if this was a 2-act movie and it turned into a slasher at the halfway point and you gave it time to breathe at the end. As it stands now, the third act, it switches into this a little abruptly, and then when it gets going, boy does it burn hot and fast. But it is a pretty cool sequence. I just wish it was more of the movie and not just the final act. I wish they had started that a little earlier, but other than that, it's cool. Now, that being said, I definitely recommend, if you don't mind a cold, dark, scientific version of The Invisible Man. It's not the happy-go-lucky original Universal, but it is a pretty interesting take on it, although that being said, it is the dark and scientific one, and if you want a more fun, classic monster movie that isn't what this is, but for what it is, it's pretty cool. And hey, Paul Verhoeven, Kevin Bacon, Thanos, it's a pretty fun movie, and I'm glad I watched it. I need to watch The Hollow Man 2. I haven't seen it. I don't know what it's like. I obviously expect it's not as good, but I'll watch that soon enough. I'm interested. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You're really helping the channel out. I'll put a relevant playlist on the bottom if you guys want to see more. I'll have more videos there. Anyway, have a good day. See you guys again very, very soon. I'll put the relevant playlist on the bottom. Have a good day.